giant orange records.
So here are my favorite finds from 2024. This has been an incredible year for record collecting for me. 2023 and 2024 have just been probably the two best years I've ever had finding and collecting records. There's just so much to go on here. This is an album I streamed probably 100 times this year and finally pulled the trigger and bought it off of Discogs. It's the Chills Kaleidoscope World. This is a 2-disc compilation of this fantastic New Zealand indie psychedelic rock band from Flying Nun. Sadly, we lost Martin Phillips this summer, and gosh, I really wish I would have been able to see them play, but thankfully they recorded a bunch of music, and it's just some of the most fantastic underground New Zealand indie rock I've ever heard. And here's some holy grails. I finally found a near mint mono Sgt. Pepper at my local Sounds Good record store. Pretty self-explanatory. It's on the Parlophone label, UK original, first press. Sounds so incredible. Then I also found a kind of a VG copy of Led Zeppelin 2. This is the RL Hot Mix on both sides. The hype is true. This record just jumps out of the speakers at you. It's so incredible. SF Sorrow by the Pretty Things. This is a reissue from 2002. This is a dense record, and it was one of the first concept albums from the Pretty Things from England. And let's go to some of my favorite reissues from this year. This is Wilco's Summer Teeth, pressed on this beautiful blue vinyl for Rocktober. When I got into these Wilco albums was when I kind of stopped listening to bands like Green Day and Third Eye Blind. It has so much more emotional depth to it, and I just got really into it. The only bummer on that is the packaging is pretty limited, but the previous vinyl editions were getting up to $100, so I got my trusty old used CD here of Wilco's Summer Teeth that has all the lyrics written in microscopic print. I really wish the LP had come with some lyrics, but for now, I will just read along with my old CD booklet. Galaxy 500 released this double LP of Uncollected Noise in New York, 88 to 90. This really captures the spirit of the band. I really love this. It looks sort of like a bootleg, but it's an official release. Yeah, I'm a huge Galaxy 500 fan. They kind of combined the best of psychedelic rock and indie rock and kind of did their own thing in the 1980s and the late 80s and early 90s, and they just made some of the most incredible music. I mean, they were around for such a short time. They were kind of, what I heard from people that were there is they were just sort of like a match or a candle that just burned really bright, and then the next thing you knew, it just wasn't there anymore. Next reissue is the Soft Boys Next Door Land. I'd never heard this one before. It originally came out in 2002, and here we have the gold reissue, a gold LP. This ranks up there with Underwater Moonlight as some of their best work. It's so good. I love Robin Hitchcock and the Soft Boys. And another reissue from Merge, this one on the first time on vinyl ever, David Kilgour's A Feather in the Engine, which also came out in 2002. Originally, David Kilgour was famously with the band The Clean, also a New Zealand Flying Nun band from the 80s and beyond, and this is one of his solo efforts. It's a pretty mellow solo album, but there's some really great songs on here. Today Is Gonna Be Mine is one of the greatest songs I've discovered this year. And some Record Store Day reissues. Gandalf, I did a pretty extensive video on this one, so check that out for more details. Surf around my channel. I will drop a card to that video where I also talk about the Rain Parade's Emergency Third Rail Power Trip. Such a great Record Store Day find, and really just one of the great Paisley Underground albums. Here's another Record Store Day one from this year, which I got way after Record Store Day. Mejor de los Nuggets. 60s garage and psych from Latin America and just Spanish-speaking countries. Wonderful stuff. It's a bunch of covers of British invasion songs for the most part. Here's a much older garage Psych comp called Electric Sugar Cube Flashbacks. This is volume 1. It's on the Archive International Productions, probably in the vein of Pebbles kind of stuff. Some of these were taken from pretty scratched up 45s. And here's another kind of obscuro garage compilation called Dustbin Full of Rubbish. I only listened to this one a handful of times, but I ended up really enjoying this one as well. And man, I actually found a stereo and a mono first press of Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, one of my absolute favorite albums of all time. You can see the mono on the label there. This includes the inner photograph of Miss Cardinale, which is not on later pressings. One of those things that got removed. I actually had a second press from 1970 for the longest time, and that photo's not there. But in fact, the photo does not change the sound of the album. This is one of the most incredible Bob Dylan albums, and I got into this stuff when I was like 18 and heading to college, and again, super cool gatefold. That's why we love records, right? Not to be outdone by this mono first press of Bob Dylan's Free Wheelin'. I also had a second or third press of this with the yellow label. Finally got a first press this year, and this was actually gifted to me by the kind folks at Sounds Good Music, so appreciate you for that. And I found this one at a yard sale, a community yard sale, sound effects of the U.S. Air Force. And this is a good way to test your stereo system because there's a lot of jets that pan across left to right. And there's atomic bomb explosion sounds. And I mean, who doesn't love that? I'm going to use this sound effect for my own music at some point, probably. And wow, I finally got some of my favorite Pebbles. This is Pebbles Volume 3. There's a great song on here called Swami by William Penn and his pals. I really, really enjoyed Volume 3 of Pebbles. It's one of my favorite ones. I also happened to pick up Pebbles Volume 2. Again, another garage Psych comp. This one is also really good. And wow, I just recently got this. This is a Spanish press of The Moves' first album with this incredible artwork. And yeah, so many good songs on here. It kind of has that sort of floppy European pressing kind of thing. Yellow Rainbow, Kilroy Was Here, The Lemon Tree, Walk Upon the Water, Flowers in the Rain, They Cover Hey Grandma, the Moby Grape song, Useless Information, Zing Went the Strings of My Heart, Fire Brigade, Cherry Blossom Clinic, Missed on a Monday Morning. I mean, this is one of the most incredible late 60s British Psych albums, and I had a kind of a compilation version of it. I'm really glad to have an original pressing, even if it's not UK. Spanish is close enough. And gosh, I really want to go to Spain one of these days because I hear that they love this kind of garagey, psychedelic beat kind of music. Syd Barrett solo album. This is the second solo album called Barrett, which I think I might actually prefer this one to Madcap Laughs. There he is in front of his car. Famously, I think he gave the car away because he just stopped driving it at some point and it had like 4 flat tires on it or something. I mean, poor Sid, he had some issues he was going through, but his pal David Gilmour helped him complete this record. Everything Syd Barrett did, there's some magic to it. It might be crazy, but there's some magic to it. This was a birthday gift that a dear friend of mine gave me. I believe it's a New Zealand press, a mono version of the Animals Animal Tracks. And it's a pretty ominous looking cover of them, you know, dressed as soldiers. And this was a great Spanish guitarist that my dad saw in concert when he was a young man. It's flamenco music by Manitas de Plata. And this is called Manitas de Plata Flamenco Guitar Volume 2. Gosh, if you think you're a good guitar player, put this on and try to play some of this stuff. It'll really warp your mind a little bit. And not to forget about my favorite genre, garage rock. Here are the Sonics. I got this in January at a record show in Orlando. Man, this is a 1980 Etiquette reissue. Sounds pretty darn good to my ears. Man, I got this from a guy that lives in the same town as me, except I had to drive 2 hours to Orlando to buy it from him. So I was glad. That was my first Sonics vinyl ever, and there's another one later. That's coming up next. Here was another birthday gift that another dear friend of mine gave me this year. This is Nick Lowe's Jesus of Cool. Hilarious album cover, and this is one where like one side of the record is really, really, really good, and the other side's pretty darn good. But the side that's really, really good is some of the best music from that era, late 70s, early 80s, New Wave era. Here's another king of New Wave is Get the Knack, their first album. This thing is really good start to finish. You know, you might think, oh, they're just My Sharona. Nah, there's so much more than that. And some of these early Tom Petty albums, you're gonna get it. Damn the Torpedoes. It just shows you how good Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were from the get-go. And while we're doing jangly 12-string Rickenbacker type stuff, this is the first Bangles EP on the Faulty label, jangly psych pop Paisley Underground. They were part of that Paisley Underground, and here's their first full-length album called All Over the Place. Really love Susanna Hoffs and company. Here she's holding a Rickenbacker in what looks to be like an abandoned warehouse or an old hangar, probably somewhere in Los Angeles. Maybe that's where they practiced. And going back to the 60s, here's Green Tambourine by the Lemon Pipers. This one's kind of a mixed bag, man. The single sounds like it's from 66, even though the album came out in 1968. There's a couple really cheesy songs on here, but by side 2, this band really kicks into like full-on psychedelic, crazy fuzz guitar mode, and it almost sounds like two different bands, like side A and side B don't really sound like the same group. They're kind of finding their voice. If they'd left off Rice is Nice, the first track, I think this might be a much more highly regarded album. That track's a little bit on the cheesy side, but thankfully they made 2 albums, and on this second album called Jungle Marmalade, they really kind of find their own voice, and this is probably like sort of like a B-grade psychedelic album. It ain't no Sgt. Pepper or nothing, but it's pretty darn good. And you know, any album cover where all the dudes in the band have their shirts off, well, you know it's gonna be a party. Surprisingly good garage rock band called the Royal Guardsmen, Return of the Red Baron. This one is from 1967, and this band was from Ocala, Florida. Pretty decent, cheap record. If you find this one for like $5 or $10, I'd say it's worth picking up. We get one of those post-Sgt. Pepper albums by Chad and Jeremy of Cabbages and Kings. Again, that's another Alice in Wonderland reference of Cabbages and Kings. So many Alice in Wonderland references in the 60s. It was a pretty solid, well-produced folk psych pop album. I've always had kind of a soft spot in my heart for Chad and Jeremy. They sung well, they performed well, they wrote some really interesting songs. And here we get the jazzy guitar of Gabor Szabo, Dreams. Man, it's really hard to explain this, but it's sort of like psychedelic jazz guitar. Incredible instrumental stuff here. This is Chico Hamilton's debut album, the Chico Hamilton Quintet, featuring Buddy Collette, Pacific Jazz Records 1209. This is a really old record, and somebody hilariously stapled this album cover together, but it's sort of like avant-garde jazz. It blows my mind every time I put it on. It's a beautiful piece of art, a mind-expanding piece of music. And this is a more like rock and roll version, rockabilly jazz, Brisbane bop by Jimmy Rivers and the Cherokee. This was recorded in the early 1960s and got released in the early 1980s. I'd been after this album for a really long time, and once the price was right on Discogs, I finally pulled the trigger on it, and I'm glad that I did. I pulled this one out of the dollar bin. It Sounds Good Music. This is Elvis's first album. It's probably in like G or G minus condition, but it still plays pretty darn good because it's a super old record from the 50s. And yeah, this is a killer album, which I'd never actually heard this before. And I was a huge Elvis fan when I was a kid, but I had some like greatest hits cassettes that kept breaking. And in that rockabilly vein, this is Ricky Nelson's second album, which also came from the Dollar Bin. It Sounds Good, and I really enjoyed this record. And another wonderful find from, you guessed it, Sounds Good Music, is a UK 1968 pressing on the Orange CBS label. This is the Byrds, Notorious Byrd Brothers. This is one of the great psychedelic folk jazzy experimental sort of raga rock albums. Very influential. At this point, David Crosby had been kicked out of the band, I guess, and they 60s photoshopped a horse in there and removed him from the picture. But anyway, this is a wonderful sounding pressing, and supposedly the UK pressings outshine the US pressings, which I'd had a copy of for a pretty long time. And here's a Detroit garage band called The Rationals. It's sort of like garage and soul, kind of starting to make that turn around the corner into psychedelic music. And the Electric Prunes' second album, Underground. This is a reissue from Music on Vinyl in glorious mono. This is the album where I feel like the Electric Prunes finally kind of start finding their own voice, and they kind of come into full fruition as a band. And this might be the only Electric Prunes album that has this much involvement and input from the band. Antique Doll is probably my favorite song on here. Gosh, this is a far out album. Farewell Aldebaran by Judy Henske and Jerry Yester. The cover kind of says it all. This was, I believe, on Frank Zappa's record label, which probably tells you all you need to know. But there's like crazy synthesizers and stuff that sounds like vocoders. I don't know how they made these sounds. I think this came out in 1969. This is crazy, way ahead of its time. It's pretty avant-garde and out there, so you got to be ready for it. And the wonderfully enjoyable Francois Hardy, who we also lost her this year. What a shame. I mean, she had to be one of the cutest and most talented women in rock and roll, early rock and roll. She's obviously French from the 60s, 50s, 70s, the Yee Yee girl from Paris. This was an incredible find. I found this awesome Easy Beats record. This is a 1967 US pressing, more rock and roll from Down Under, Friday on My Mind. It's a great song. Me and my son listen to this song almost every Friday just because, hey, it's a great song. My guitar teacher taught me that song when I was like 14. It was one of the first songs I ever learned, probably in the first 6 months of learning to play guitar. And it's a challenging song for me to learn at the time. Another great compilation. Now I'm going to go through my Athens trip. I don't want to revisit every single album I got there, but Highs in the mid 60s. It's a Pebbles offshoot. This is volume 13, Texas, part 3. Really good. I want to find some more albums from this series, Highs in the mid 60s. Finally found Ryan Adams' Heartbreaker on vinyl. This is a double LP, and man, this is one of those albums that I could probably never get tired of. I can just listen to it over and over and over again. It's just so good. And gosh, here's a new discovery for me. The Pandoras, Stop Pretending. Absolutely love this. This might be one of my favorite garage rock albums of all time. This came out in the mid 1980s as part of the Los Angeles garage rock revival thing. And man, it's just about as good as any garage album I've ever heard. And bonus points for being an all-female band. So cool. Here's a recent Sundays reissue of the album Graffiti. I really enjoyed this one. It's very like jazz-leaning psychedelic pop rock from the late 60s. I've only listened to this a handful of times, but I know I've really enjoyed it. I'm going to keep on listening to this. And, you know, I think I found so many records this year that I'm going to take quite a sabbatical from buying records in 2025. I have quite a stash to to keep my interest going for a while. Here's another one I found at Wuxtree in Athens. This is the Tiffany shade. Wonderful garage psych from the late 60s, a purple violet sort of Sundazed reissue. And another Sundazed reissue. This one's on red vinyl. CA Quintet, Trip Through Hell. I mean, this record is really hard to describe, but it's been featured quite heavily in the vinyl community, and that's how I learned about it. And I'm really glad to have picked up a pretty affordable reissue. And another reissue, I told you the Sonics would be back. Boom! Here it is. Man, this is a Big Beat reissue. Again, absolutely love the Sonics. One of the most important garage rock bands ever. They might have been the first punk rock band of all time. That might be a hill that I'm willing to die on. 96 Tears, maybe question mark, and the Mysterians were the first punk rock band. I don't really know. I found this awesome reissue of their debut album at Atlantic Sounds in Daytona Beach. Really, really love this record. This reissue plays at 45 RPM and was mastered by Bob Ludwig, aka RL, who made the Led Zeppelin II RL Hot Mix. Found some soul music. Here was Sam and Dave, Soul Men, on the wonderful Stax Records. And I couldn't leave that one alone, so I also found Sam and Dave's Hold On, I'm Coming, which actually came out first. And this is on the Blue Stax label. Wonderful stuff. Really love how those guys sang together, and just having the Stax house band back them up. It's basically Booker T and the MGs. Made for some awesome music. I picked up this Nuggets Volume 2. I was a little bit skeptical at first, but I ended up really, really enjoying this one. So yeah, I would say if you like Nuggets 1, this is pretty essential. I think my favorite Ventures album I found this year, and I found a whole lot of them, is called Where the Action Is. This kind of sums up everything that's awesome about the Ventures. You get a nice Mossrite guitar on the back album cover, and it's just a super fun, fast-paced album. None of the songs exceed 3 minutes. Some of them don't even break the 2-minute mark. And the longest song on here is 2 minutes and 41 seconds. So this thing just shoots by in a breeze. It is one of their most fun records and one of my favorite Ventures albums. Going more into the new wave path, Devo, Freedom of Choice. I really, really got into this album, and was glad to have found this one at Wax Records in Vero Beach. Also from Wax Records in Vero Beach, here is Dolly Parton, The Monument Singles Collection, 1964 to 1968. These were some of the first recordings that Dolly Parton did, because her first album didn't come out until 68 or 69, something like that. You could tell this lady had a lot of talent. Her voice was on fire, even on her earliest recordings, and she was definitely a pioneering woman in country music. Gosh, she's always been incredibly gorgeous too. And I looked up some of these singles online. Each of these singles probably cost more than this entire compilation cost. And here's a cool one that I found at my local shop. It sounds good. This is the Black Tambourines Chica EP. It's a Record Store Day 2016 limited edition. They're kind of like surf rock, surf punk, indie, flower punk. I don't know. I really enjoyed this record. Tons of reverb, tons of craziness. It goes by in a breeze. These guys, if you haven't heard them, look them up. Black Tambourines. And I had a reissue of this for a while. The Leaves' Hey Joe. Finally found an original copy. Yeah, this is a really kind of a overlooked garage folk album. Some standout tracks on here, including Dr. Stone, which kicks it off. Get Out My Life Woman, a lot of people covered that. Hey Joe, of course, everybody covered that, but Lee's version kind of takes the cake on it. They do a good version of Tobacco Road, but Too Many People is the other killer track on here. They go between kind of jazzy folk, like The Association, and some of the most fuzzed out, crazy 60s punk and folk rock all on one record. And possibly, I told you I love the Sonics, and the Mysterians, the Leaves, but I think the Remains might have been my favorite 60s garage band, or they're definitely top tier. They had sophisticated compositions, and their songs are still super fun and enjoyable and rowdy rock and roll. This is a French compilation from the early 80s called Diddy Wad Diddy. It's on the Eva label, and I just can't get enough of The Remains. Like, I played this one so many times, and I've listened to this band for years and years now. Another quest I have is to find mono copies of the early Rolling Stones album. Of course, I found this one at Sounds Good 12 by 5. I believe that was their American debut. I had a super scratched up copy for the longest time, so it was nice to finally get a super clean mono early pressing. This was a really cool reissue by Sundazed. It's just a compilation, really, of the king of the surf guitar in all his glory, Dick Dale and his Deltones. The singles collection 61 to 65. This has so many awesome songs on it, and this just makes me want to go pick up the guitar and practice some more. And it's cool to see a photo of all the singles on the back. And you can't just have one Dick Dale record. This is Live at Ciro's, Dick Dale and his Deltones Rock Out. I don't know what year this was from. The 60s, surf rock, king of surf guitar. I mean, this is one heck of a live album. Probably the best live surf album I got this year. And here's another really weird one. This is We're All Normal and We Want Our Freedom, a tribute to Arthur Lee and Love. This came out way back in 1994 and has this trifold thing going on with this yellow and green vinyl. They're 3 10-inch discs, which is kind of crazy. Some of these fare way better than others, but if you only check out one track from here, I would say listen to A Message to Pretty from David Kilgore, who is from The Clean, and Martin Phillips from The Chills. They do that one together. Easily my favorite track on here. This was one that was on my want list for a long time. This is a stereo copy of The Deep Six. They were, I think, a Bay Area, California band, kind of like a Mamas and Papas kind of thing almost. Not quite as innovative and as daring, but maybe they were like Northern California's Mamas and Papas. Again, this isn't the greatest album of all time, but they definitely have the male-female harmonies going on. They do a really cool version of Paint It Black and Solitary Man. I just really love the photo on this album cover. One of my favorite finds online this year was the Denver Mexicans. I was reading through an old magazine from John Allore's collection. He's a friend of mine who's no longer with us, but we had very similar taste in music. This was advertised in one of his British 80s music zines, the Denver Mexicans. This is some 80s rock. I think they were actually from California, but yeah, it's pretty like heady, psychedelic, Hendrix-like guitar playing. It's like if Hendrix was more of a garage band. This is the Rainy Days, D-A-Z-E, That Acapulco Gold. I believe these guys were from Colorado. Killer little garage rock album. It's kind of got some frat rock elements to it, but there's some really cool moments on here. There's some like soul, psych, fuzz, you know, all the good stuff. And this was a band called the Bird Watchers. They were from South Florida. This is a compilation. Again, they're very kind of like folk rocky, like very strong pop singles. And this is just a compilation. Apparently this band was pretty popular in Florida at the time. And last but not least, some 45s and some EPs. The Clientele released a flexi for the Merge Records 35th anniversary. This is called Trains in the Night, and it was only available at, I believe, one of their shows, and it was only available for 2 days on Merge, as you might get this bonus. So I ordered some items from merge.com, and yeah, great song. It was an outtake from their 2023 album, I'm Not There Anymore. And here is Claire's Not Real, which was featured on the I'm Not There Anymore album, and the B-side Still Corridor, which I believe was not on the album. And this one was pretty hard to find too, but thankfully Merge had it on their website. I found one of my favorite Ty Segall releases. This is an EP that's 245s called Mr. Face. Came out quite some time ago, but one of the records is red, and the other one, of course, is blue. 245s. I mean, this record label probably hated him for putting this out, but they're all good. Mr. Face, Circles, Drug Mugger, and The Picture. Some of my favorite stuff this guy ever did, and this is the only place you can find them. And here's a test pressing of Body Snatchers. They were Austin, Texas's first punk band, and this is number 13 out of 15. Pretty cool little 5-song EP. So that's it for me in 2024. I found some really awesome stuff, and I'm going to be listening to this huge pile of records for quite a long time. Happy collecting, everyone.
Giant, orange, giant, orange, giant, orange.